Welcome back to Remnants of the Veil, Episode 9, The Breaking. The morning came without sunrise. On the vault of whispered ledgers, there was no sun, only the ambient lighting that simulated a day cycle for the comfort of species that needed one. At 06 OU sector time, the lights brightened from their nighttime amber to the cool white of artificial morning. The market decks were scheduled to open. The food stalls were scheduled to serve. The corridors were scheduled to fill with the ordinary. Traffic of 1,000,000 beings going about the business of coexistence. The lights came on. The corridors did not fill. Ren heard the screaming before she understood what it was. She was in her cabin, dressed, her bag by the door where it had been. For 2 days, the shard was in her hand. She had been holding it when the sound started, feeling its pulse synchronize with something she could not name, and then the pulse had changed, sharpened. The steady rhythm that had been constant for weeks stuttered, skipped, and resumed at a faster tempo, like a heartbeat under stress. Then the screaming. Not one voice. Many. Coming from the market deck 2 levels above her, transmitted through the vault's metal bones with the clarity of a ship built to carry sound. The screaming was not uniform. It rose and fell in waves, punctuated by sounds that Ren recognized from growing up on Bastion. The crack of something breaking, the heavy thud of bodies hitting metal, the sharp bark of someone giving orders that no one was following. She opened her cabin door. The corridor was empty. The residential deck had not yet woken, but the sound from above was getting louder and closer. A Thal'Seri staff member ran past her cabin. Not walking, running. The staff member's face, borrowed, human, male, was flickering at the edges. Stress response, the shape-shifting destabilizing under fear. The borrowed face dissolved for a half-second, showing dark, featureless skin. Beneath, then snapped back into place. The staff member did not stop, did not acknowledge Ren, just ran. Ren grabbed her bag and followed. The market deck was unrecognizable. Ren emerged from the access stairwell into a space she had walked through every day for weeks. The broad central avenue lined with stalls, the high ceiling with its simulated sky, the carefully maintained illusion of an open-air marketplace that made the vault feel like a city rather than a ship. The stalls were overturned. Half of them were burning, not with fire, but with the acrid chemical burn of overloaded power cells and shorted displays. The simulated sky was dark, its projectors smashed. The avenue was filled with people, not shopping, not trading, not coexisting, fighting. It had separated along species lines with the brutal efficiency of a fracture following a fault. Drakkar on the east side of the avenue, clustered behind overturned stall barricades, their natural armor and size giving them a physical advantage in close quarters. Some were soldiers, off-duty crew from Drakkar ships docked at the vault's ports, carrying sidearms and short blades. Most were civilians, traders, laborers, the support staff that every fleet required. Civilians with Drakkar biology, which meant civilians who were 8 feet tall and covered in bone plating. Velithari in the center, clustered around their art galleries and cultural quarters, their crystal displays still glowing, their guards projecting wards across the entrances to the Velithari district. 20,000 Velithari lived aboard the vault, diplomats, scholars, artists, their households. They had their own section, their own security, and they were sealing it off with crystallized barriers while the other species tore the market apart. Behind the wards, Velithari families pressed together, watching the violence through shimmering walls of arcana. Children held against their parents' robes, guards with crystal staves standing at the barriers with the rigid discipline of soldiers, who knew the wards would not hold forever. Humans on the west side, more numerous but smaller. They had weapons, sidearms pulled from belt holsters, the short utility blades that every spacer carried, and improvised arms for those who had neither. Metal rods from display racks, a cargo hook, a ceramic knife meant for cutting sample fabrics, a fire extinguisher swung like a mace by a woman whose face was blank with the particular emptiness of someone who had stopped thinking and started surviving. An off-duty Marine, drunk and terrified, fired his standard-issue pistol into the smoke. Between them, in the center of the avenue, the Thal'Seri staff were trying to restore order and failing. Their borrowed faces were flickering under the stress, human faces showing dark skin beneath, Drakkar faces losing their bone-plating texture. The masks were failing. And with each failure, the violence intensified because nothing accelerated distrust like watching a face melt into someone else's. It started with a shove. A Drakkar dockworker bumped a human trader. Or a human trader bumped a Drakkar dockworker. No one would ever establish who touched whom first. It did not matter. What mattered was the response. The Drakkar turning. The human stepping back, the moment of eye contact between two beings who had been watching each other across species lines for days and had finally stopped pretending civility was possible. The Drakkar swung. An open hand. But a Drakkar open hand weighed more than a human punch. The traitor went down. Blood. Red. Human. Sprayed across the floor tiles. A human dockworker grabbed a metal display rod. Heavy, solid, sharpened. At one end from a break and drove it into the gap between the Drakkar's rib plates. The rod punched through, sinking 3 inches into the flesh beneath. Not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to make the Drakkar scream, a sound that no human in the market had ever heard a Drakkar make. The violence spread the way fire spreads. Not gradually, but in jumps, leaping from point to point across the market deck as each new confrontation triggered 3 more. A Drakkar soldier drew his sidearm and fired into the crowd. The first shot hit a human man in the shoulder. He spun, fell, clutched the wound with hands that were already covered in someone else's blood. The second shot hit a woman beside him in the chest. She did not spin. She dropped straight down, her legs giving out beneath her, her eyes open, her mouth forming a word she did not have time to say. The third shot went wide and hit a food stall's heating unit. The unit exploded. Cooking oil sprayed across the avenue. 3 people, 2 human, 1 Thal'Seri, caught fire. The screaming changed pitch. A human with a blade, a proper blade, military surplus, the kind that freeborn spacers kept under their bunks, charged a Drakkar civilian and drove the blade into his forearm where the bone plating thinned near the joint. The blade went deep. Amber Drakkar blood sprayed across the human's face. The Drakkar grabbed the human's wrist and crushed it, the sound of bones breaking audible even over the riot. The human dropped the blade but did not drop. He headbutted the Drakkar with the desperation of a being who had no weapon left but his body. The Drakkar staggered. 3 more humans piled onto him. Across the avenue, a group of Drakkar dockworkers had cornered a Thal'Seri merchant. The merchant's face was dissolving, flickering between the human identity it had been wearing and the dark, featureless skin beneath. The Drakkar did not care which face they were hitting. They hit both. The merchant went down. One of the eye. Drakkar picked up a broken stall support, metal, heavy, 2 meters long, and swung it into the merchant's body. The sound was not a sound Ren could describe. She would hear it in her sleep for years. A human Marine, sober, armed, trained, had taken cover behind an overturned display case and was firing disciplined shots into the Drakkar line. Not panicked, methodical. Each shot aimed at gaps in bone plating, throats, armpits, the soft tissue behind the knee joint. 2 Drakkar went down. A third charged the Marine's position. The Marine fired twice more, both shots hitting the Drakkar's chest plate, cracking it, not penetrating. The Drakkar reached the display case and flipped it. The Marine rolled. He came up firing. The Drakkar came down swinging. They met in the space between and neither of them walked away. Nearby, a Velithari ward flickered and died. The guard projecting it had been hit by a stray shot, the crystal staff falling. From her hands, the barrier dissolving. Humans and Drakkar poured into the gap. The Velithari civilians behind the ward screamed, a different scream from the others, higher, resonant, carrying frequencies that made human teeth ache and Drakkar bone plating vibrate. A Velithari father pulled his children behind him and projected a personal ward with his bare hands, weaker than a staff-projected barrier, barely visible, enough to stop the first blow but not the second. Blood in 3 colors now. Red, amber, the deep violet of Thal'Seri. The market deck was no longer a marketplace. It was a killing floor, bodies layered on the tile, some still moving, crawling, trying to reach cover that no longer existed. The fires had spread to the structural supports. Smoke filled the upper third of the avenue, thick and chemical, turning the simulated sky into a gray-black ceiling that pressed down on the violence like a lid. The Thal'Seri security forces arrived and lasted less than 10 minutes. They were outnumbered, outgunned by the Dracor sidearms, and undermined by their own biology. The stress was causing their faces to fail. A security officer's face dissolved mid-sentence. The humans nearest to her recoiled. Then they attacked. Not because she was a threat, because she was a lie, and lies were the thing they could not tolerate while the world burned around them. The security line broke. Officers fled or were dragged into the mob. Bodies on the floor of the market deck, Dracor and human, some still moving, some not. The fires spread from the cooking stalls to the display units to the deck plating itself. Smoke filled the avenue. Through the smoke, the sounds of a species experiment failing, screaming, crashing, the wet sound of blades ending flesh, the bark of gunfire echoing off walls that had been built for commerce. Ren pressed herself against the stairwell wall. Her bag was clutched to her chest. The shard inside it pulsed against her ribs, hot through the fabric. She ran. Ren took the service corridors, the ones that ran between the main decks, narrow, poorly lit, designed for maintenance crews and cargo transport. She had learned them during her weeks on the vault, mapping the ship the way she had mapped Bastion. As a child, because knowing the back routes was how you survived in a place where the front routes could become dangerous. The service corridors were not empty. Other civilians had the same idea, humans mostly, but some Thal'Seri staff whose faces had reverted to their natural dark forms, and Thal'Seri refugees who had escaped when the wards fell. A mother carrying a child whose skin was luminescent. Violet, the child was crying, and the crying carried harmonics that echoed through the metal corridors in ways that made the walls hum. A Dracor traitor, bleeding from a gash across his face, walking in the same direction as the humans who had been his competitors an hour ago and were now his fellow refugees. A human boy, maybe 12, alone, running on bare feet, carrying nothing. They moved together without coordination, a current of frightened beings flowing through the vault's arteries toward the docking bays. No one spoke. No one had the energy for speech. The only communication was the direction of movement, forward, away, out. Behind them, the sounds followed, crashing, screaming, gunfire, the sharp crack of human sidearms and the deeper thump of Dracor siege pistols. The deep subsonic boom of something structural failing, a bulkhead or a deck support giving way under forces it was never designed to absorb. The vault groaned around them. The ship itself was protesting what was happening inside it. A body lay in the corridor ahead. Human, female. Ren stepped over her and kept moving. She did not look down. She could not afford to look down. Looking down meant stopping, and stopping meant dying, and the shard against her chest was pulsing so fast, now that it felt less like a heartbeat and more like a countdown. Ren reached the civilian docking bay. 50 escape pods lined the walls. Half were already gone. The remaining pods were surrounded, 200 or more pressing against the access hatches, fighting for positions, pushing and climbing over each other with the desperate energy of beings who understood that the number of pods was less than the number of people who needed them. She was small. She had always been small. A signals analyst, not a soldier, not a dock worker. She weighed less than anyone else in the bay. In the crush of bodies pressing toward the pods, she was pushed sideways, shoved against a wall so hard her ribs cracked against the metal. A Dracor civilian, not F-iding, just moving, just trying to reach a pod like everyone else, stepped on her foot. She felt something break. She did not have time to feel pain. A fight broke out at the nearest pod. 2 humans and a Dracor, all grabbing for the same hatch handle. One human pulled a knife. The Dracor knocked the knife away and threw the human into the crowd. The second human got the hatch open, dove inside, and sealed it behind him. The pod launched with a single occupant, designed for 4. 1. Ren watched the pod leave and understood. There would be no order here, no cue, no fairness, only speed. She looked up. Maintenance conduits. The same narrow passages she had been using to navigate the vault. One ran directly above the row of escape pods. Ren climbed, pulled herself onto a cargo crate, then a support strut, then into the conduit. Narrow, dark, she crawled. Below her, through the mesh floor, pods launching one by one. She reached the access panel above the 4th pod, still closed. The crowd hadn't reached it yet. She opened the panel, dropped through, landed on the pod's hull, keyed the hatch. Emergency code universal, printed in 5 languages. Fell inside, hit launch. The pod ejected from the vault. The acceleration pressed Ren into the seat. Through the tiny viewport, the vault receded, burning from within. The pod's navigation asked for a destination. She pressed automated, nearest habitable body, and let the pod decide. Behind her, the vault. Ahead, an unknown planet. In her hand, an Aelith artifact that would not stop pulsing. Ren Calloway disappeared from the war. The distress signal from the vault reached every ship in the sector simultaneously. On the hammer of Calloway, the Overlord made his decision in 4 seconds. Thoruk, take 1/3 of the fleet. Evacuate every Drakkar citizen aboard. Secure the engineering sections. Go. Thoruk's detachment. 4 Dreadnought-class ships, 8 Ironsides, and 12 Thrak boarding pods, broke formation and accelerated toward the vault. On the Defiance, Vasquez heard the signal and felt something. Cold settle in his chest. All ships, every human vessel, move to the vault. Evacuation priority. Deploy every Marine, every shuttle. The vault's civilian population includes hundreds of thousands of humans and other species with nowhere else to go. They will head for our ships. Take them all. On the Luminarch Etherius, Sivalith felt the vault's agony through the veil stream. A million minds in distress. Send everything, she told Kalindra. Every scout, both cruisers, the troop carrier. 20,000 of our people are on that vault. The Velithari flotilla moved, 14 Whisper-class scouts materializing from concealment simultaneously, 2 Crystal-class cruisers, and 3 troop carriers with 4,000 soldiers. They appeared across the sector in a ring around the vault with the coordinated precision of a species that had been planning this contingency since the day they arrived. 3 factions, all moving toward the same target, all with different objectives, none of them coordinating. Vasquez saw the war begin through the bridge viewport of the Defiance. The Drakkar arrived first. Thrak boarding pods punched into the vault's hull, 48 impacts in sequence, 12 from each dreadnought, each one a controlled explosion of breaching charges and reinforced entry tubes. Drakkar soldiers poured into the vault's corridors. The Velithari arrived 14 seconds later. The scouts did not dock. They materialized in a ring around the vault's perimeter, crystal hulls bending light, and the troop carrier slammed into the vault's diplomatic port. 300 soldiers with crystal staves deployed into corridors that already had Drakkar soldiers in them. 2 armies inside a burning city, both claiming to be there for evacuation, neither willing to yield. A corridor to the other. Then the shooting started. Vasquez watched it from the viewport. He would remember what he saw for the rest of his life. A dreadnought, one of Thoruk's, a 60,000-ton capital ship bristling with thermal batteries, exchanged fire, with a Velithari Crystal-class cruiser at close range. The dreadnought's broadside lit up the void, 4 thermal batteries firing simultaneously, each one designed to crack planetary fortifications. The cruiser's crystal wards absorbed the first volley, the second bent under the third, and the 4th punched through. The cruiser's port-hull section vaporized. Crystal fragments and atmosphere and bodies spun into the void, glittering. In the weapons fire, like stars being born and dying in the same second. Through the debris field, the Velithari scouts moved. Vasquez could barely track them. Their crystal hulls bent light around their profiles, making them shimmer and blur. They dropped through the void like predators through water, appearing firing crystal array bursts that pierced Drakkar hull plating with surgical precision, then vanishing again. An Ironside took a hit through its engine section. The ship shifted. Another scout appeared behind it and fired again, 2 shots, precise, into the Ironside's reactor housing. The ship came apart. Vasquez watched a Drakkar warship die. Thal'Seri, 100 crew. The hull split along the reactor breach. The atmosphere inside, breathable, warm. The air 1,700 Drakkar had been breathing seconds ago, vented into the vacuum. The bodies that spilled from the breach boiled first in the heat of the reactor blast and froze a moment, later in the cold of space. The transition from life to death took less than a second. The visual lasted much longer. Around the dying Ironside, the battle continued. Drakkar Vorath-class light cruisers, the ones designed for speed and forward. Assault chased the Velithari scouts through the debris field. A dogfight played out at capital ship scale. The Drakkar were faster in straight lines. The Velithari were faster in everything else. A Vorath locked onto a scout and fired its forward siege cannon. The shot missed by meters, the scout bending. Light around its profile at the last instant and slipping sideways through space like something that did not obey physics. The Velithari scouts were not just fighting. They were drawing the Drakkar away from the vault, pulling Thorax escort ships into pursuit while the troop carrier extracted Velithari citizens from inside. Every scout that dodged a Drakkar volley was buying time for a transport shuttle to launch from the vault's diplomatic port. Then a Dreadnought missile hit the colony transport. Vasquez saw it happen. The missile was not aimed at the transport. It was aimed at a Velithari scout that had been using the human formation as cover, darting behind civilian ships to break Drakkar targeting locks. The scout dodged. The missile did not have time to correct. It hit the colony transport amidships. The transport, a civilian vessel, unarmed, carrying xenobiologists who had come to study the entity, folded inward. The missile's warhead was designed to breach warship armor. Against a civilian hull, it did not breach. It obliterated. The transport became debris in less than a second. 312 people, scientists, researchers, support crew, became heat and pressure and expanding gas and fragments of metal that had been a ship and was now a memorial no one would build. Vasquez gripped the command chair. His knuckles were white. "Weapons officer," Vasquez said. His voice was the voice of a man who had just watched something break inside himself and was still functional enough to give orders. "Target the nearest Velithari cruiser. Captain, our weapons. I know what our weapons can do. Fire." The Defiance fired. The shots splashed against crystal wards, ineffective, meaningless, a statement rather than an attack. The Velithari noticed. A crystal array burst hit the Defiance's port side. The ship shuddered. Hull breach on deck 4. The crooked sensor. Array, the one that had been repaired with mismatched parts, was sheared off entirely. 12 casualties. "Return fire. Every gun we have. And broadcast on all channels. All factions are now engaged against civilian evacuation vessels. The ceasefire is over. Repeat. The ceasefire is over." The Defiance fired again, and the Drakkar, hearing the broadcast, did not distinguish between the Velithari who had fired first and the humans who were firing back. A Dreadnought adjusted its targeting solution to include the human formation. Thermal batteries that had been aimed at Crystal-class cruisers swept across the void toward the Defiance, and the freeborn haulers clustered around it. The margin of error, Captain Tesh's ship, the hauler that had stood between F-fleets that had refused Drakkar inspections, that had been crewed by people who believed standing where they were needed was worth the risk, took a thermal battery, hit through its reactor housing. The ship did not go dark, it detonated. The reactor breach was instantaneous, a white flash that burned after images into the retinas of every bridge officer watching from every ship in the sector. The margin of error became a sphere of expanding heat and light and debris. 41. Crew. Captain Tesh, who had told the Drakkar she would submit to inspections when they learned to say please. Gone. Not injured. Not drifting. Gone. The kind of gone that leaves no wreckage large enough to recover and no bodies to bring home. Vasquez watched the flash fade. He watched the debris scatter. He watched the space where the margin of error had become empty. Just void, just nothing. Just the absence of a ship and a crew and a captain who had been braver than the galaxy deserved. 3 factions firing on each other. The void between the vault and the gate was lit with weapons fire. Thermal battery blasts tracing orange lines through the black crystal array bursts cutting violet arcs. Human kinetic rounds sparking against shields and hulls like embers thrown into wind. A Drakkar Vorath-class cruiser rammed a Thal'Seri scout that had been harassing its flank. The collision was deliberate, Drakkar doctrine at its most fundamental. The Vorath's reinforced prow crushed the scout's crystal hull like stepping on glass. Both ships died. The Vorath's crew, 300 Drakkar warriors, went down fighting, still firing their weapons as the atmosphere vented and the cold took them. The scout's crew, 12 Thal'Seri, died in silence, their crystal hull shattering around them, their wards flickering out one by one like candles in a storm. Escape pods from the vault launched into the crossfire. Some made it through, small, fast, their automated navigation systems threading them between weapons exchanges with the blind luck of objects too insignificant to target. Others did not. An escape pod carrying a family. The viewport showed faces, pressed against the glass, a child's hand flat against the surface, drifted into the path of a Drakkar thermal battery volley aimed at a Thal'Seri cruiser. The volley was not aimed at the pod. The pod was not large enough to register on Drakkar targeting systems. It simply existed in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the thermal energy designed to crack crystal wards vaporized it without noticing. Vasquez saw it happen. He saw the faces in the viewport. He saw the flash. He saw the empty space where the pod had been. He did not look away. He could not afford to look away. Looking away meant missing the next threat, and the Defiance was taking fire from both sides now. Thal'Seri crystal array bursts from the port, Drakkar thermal splashes from the starboard, the old ship shuddering and groaning under impacts it had never been built to sustain. Hull integrity at 62%, the damage control officer reported. Decks 3 and 4 are sealed. Deck 7 reporting fires. Medical bay is at capacity. Hold position, Vasquez said. Keep evacuating. Every shuttle that can fly, every pod that can launch, get our people off that vault, the Defiance held. Because that was what the Defiance did. It held position between things that wanted to destroy each other, and it refused to move, and it took the hits, and it kept going. Battered, burning, held together by stubbornness and duct tape and the sheer refusal of a crew that had followed. Their captain into the impossible and was not about to stop now, and the entity's crescent pulsed in the distance, untouched, watching. By nightfall, the vault of whispered ledgers was dark. Its internal power systems had failed. The fires on the market decks had spread to engineering. The evacuation was incomplete. Thousands of civilians still aboard, trapped in sections that had lost atmosphere or were blocked by structural damage. 20,000 Drakkar soldiers poured into the vault of whispered ledgers through 48 breach points. 4 dreadnoughts worth of warriors, armored, armed, moving through the corridors of a burning city with the coordinated aggression of a species that treated urban warfare as a recreational activity. The orders from Calloway had been specific. Evacuate Drakkar citizens. Secure the vault's critical infrastructure. Non-Drakkar personnel were not a priority. The soldiers interpreted not a priority the way Drakkar soldiers interpreted most things. Practically. Humans in the corridors were shoved aside. Thal'Seri staff who did not move fast enough were thrown against walls. Those who resisted, who raised weapons, who blocked corridors, who made the mistake of standing between a Drakkar soldier and a Drakkar civilian, were shot. Not with warning shots, not with restraint. The Drakkar did not do restraint. A human dock worker with a metal rod who refused to clear a corridor took a siege rifle blast to the chest that threw him 6 meters and left a hole the size of a fist. A Thal'Seri security officer whose face flickered at the wrong moment was cut down by 2 soldiers who did not wait to determine if the shapeshifter was hostile. The officer's dark, featureless body lay in the corridor, and the soldiers stepped over it without breaking stride. 16,000 soldiers secured breach points, held corridors, established perimeters around the vault's engineering sections and docking bays. They moved through the vault like an occupying army, because that was what they were. Thorok split his remaining 4,000 at the primary breach point. Krenak, take 1st and 2nd Company, 1,000 soldiers, secure the civilian. Districts, get every Drakkar citizen to the boarding pods. Krenak, young, barely 30, ritual scars still fresh on his chiton, looked at the warlord. And if they engage us first, warlord, then engage them back, loudly. Krenak grinned. It was the wrong expression for the situation and exactly the right expression for Krenak. He took 1,000 soldiers and headed for the market decks. Thorok took 3,000 warriors, heavy weapons, breaching equipment, the best the Dominion had, and headed for the vault's actual vault. The Intelligence Corps, the place where the Thal'Seri kept the secrets that made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy, despite having no army, no fleet, and no homeworld. Krenak's soldiers hit the market deck like a wave of armored fury. The riot had been chaos. Civilians fighting civilians, improvised weapons, mob violence without direction or purpose. The arrival of 1,000 Drakkar soldiers in full combat armor, carrying siege rifles and short blades, changed the dynamic. Instantly. The human combatants fell back. The Thal'Seri security forces, what was left of them, vanished into the corridors. The Drakkar civilians who had been fighting behind barricades cheered, but Krenak was not there to win the riot. He was there to evacuate. Every Drakkar civilian, move toward the boarding pods. Now, this is not a request. Some moved. Others did not. Drakkar who had been fighting for an hour, who had taken wounds, who had watched friends die, and who were not ready to stop. A traitor with amber blood running down his face planted himself in front of Krenak's advance. I am not leaving until they pay for what they did to Gorath. He pointed at the human barricades. They killed him. They stabbed him through the throat while he was trying to reach his family. And you will avenge him by dying in a burning. Mark it on a Thal'Seri ship, Krenak said. Your clan will be very proud. They will compose a song about the warrior who refused evacuation to fight dock workers with cooking implements. You don't understand? I understand that the vault is losing structural integrity, the fires are spreading to the engineering deck, and in approximately 40 minutes this entire section will depressurize. I understand that Gorath would not want you to die here. And I understand that if you do not move right now, I will have 2 of my soldiers carry you, which will be embarrassing for both of us. He paused. Move. The traitor moved. Krenak's soldiers swept the Drakkar residential. Districts pulling civilians from barricaded rooms, sealed stalls, makeshift shelters. They moved fast, they were efficient. And everywhere they went, the human civilians who saw 1,000 armed Drakkar soldiers moving through the corridors did the same calculation. The Drakkar were not here to fight. They were here to leave. And leaving sounded better than staying. In Krenak's sector, something unexpected happened. Human civilians began following the Drakkar evacuation columns. Not because they were invited, Krenak's orders said nothing about humans. But Krenak's soldiers were clearing corridors, securing junctions, creating safe passages through the burning vault. And the humans had nowhere else to go. Their own ships had not yet deployed ground teams. The corridors behind them were full of fire and mob violence. The corridors ahead were full of Drakkar soldiers who were at least moving in a direction that led to docking bays. Krenak saw the humans falling in behind his column. His orders did not cover this. His orders said, evacuate Drakkar citizens. They did not say shoot human civilians who were walking in the same direction. He made a decision that no Drakkar tactical manual would have endorsed. Let them follow, he told his sergeants. They slow us down, they get left. They cause trouble, they get dealt with. But if they keep pace, they keep pace. For 37 minutes, Drakkar soldiers and human civilians moved through the vault's corridors together. Not as allies, not as friends, as beings who wanted to survive and had recognized in the animal part of their brains that moving in the same direction was better than dying alone. Elsewhere in the vault, other Drakkar units were not as accommodating. A squad, from the Fist of Orkath's garrison, Clan Drekval loyalists' hard line, following orders to the letter, encountered a group of human families barricaded in a residential block that sat between them and a Drakkar community cluster. They ordered the humans to clear the corridor. The humans did not move fast enough. The squad opened fire. 11 humans, 4 of them children, died in a corridor that had been their home for weeks. The squad reported the corridor cleared and continued to their objective. The bodies stayed where they fell. No one came to move them. The vault had run out of people who moved bodies. A Drakkar soldier, one of Krenak's young, fresh scars, saw a human child separated from the evacuation column, crying in a sealed doorway. The soldier stopped, looked at the child, looked at the column moving away, picked the child up with one armored hand and carried her to the nearest group of human civilians, set her down, said nothing, kept moving. Krenak saw it happen. He said nothing either. Some things did not need commentary. They just needed to happen and be remembered and mattered later when the species who had shared 37 minutes of cooperation tried to kill each other in the void outside. The cooperation ended when the Velithari troop carriers docked. 4,000 Velithari soldiers pouring into the vault from 3 entry points changed everything. Kalindra commanded them. Not Civilith. The High Resonant remained aboard the Aetherius, directing the fleet action, feeling the battle through the Veil stream. Kalindra was the blade. Her wounded arm had healed enough to hold a crystal staff, a new one, issued from the Aetherius's armory, lighter than the one Kael'vor had broken but sharp enough for what was coming. She split the force at the primary docking port. 3,500 soldiers to the Velithari residential district, secure the perimeter, reinforce the wards that the civilian guards had been holding, establish evacuation corridors. To the troop carriers, protect the 20,000 Velithari civilians and get them off the vault alive. 500 soldiers, the best, the fastest, the ones trained for close-quarters operations in hostile environments, Kalindra kept for herself. The Thal'Seri vault, she told her formation commanders, the intelligence corps, every secret. The Thal'Seri have gathered on every faction in the galaxy is in that room. The Drakkar are already heading for it. We get there first. The High Resonance orders were evacuation, Commander. The High Resonance orders were to protect Velithari interests. If the Drakkar seize the Thal'Seri archives, they will have intelligence on every Velithari operation, every diplomatic channel, every agent we have ever placed in any faction. That is a Velithari interest. She looked at the formation commander with golden eyes that held the same fire they had held when she stepped between Kael'vor's longsword and Chitterek. We get there first. Move. 500 Velithari soldiers. Move through the vault's corridors like a crystal blade cutting through smoke. Their wards projected ahead of them, shimmering barriers that cleared debris, deflected stray gunfire, and pushed burning wreckage aside. They moved faster than the Drakkar, smaller, lighter, their crystal staves doubling as path clearing. Tools. Where the Drakkar battered through obstacles, the Velithari sliced through them. Kalindra led from the front. Her staff hummed in her hands. The corridors were full of smoke and screaming and the aftermath of violence that had burned through. Every species' capacity for coexistence. She stepped over bodies. She moved through sections where the fighting had already ended and the dead lay in positions that told stories she did not have time to read. The vault's intelligence core was deep in the ship, below the market decks, below the residential sections, in a reinforced chamber that the Thal'Seri had designed to survive anything short of the ship's complete destruction. Kalindra's 500 reached the outer access corridor at the same time Thoric's 3,000 reached it from the opposite direction. 3,000 Drakkar warriors, 500 Velithari soldiers, both converging on the same corridor from opposite directions, 60 meters apart. The shooting started before either commander gave an order. A Drakkar point soldier saw crystal staves and fired. A Velithari ward-bearer saw siege rifles and projected. The corridor became a kill zone in less than a second. Crystal array bursts, cut through the smoke, violet light slicing through Drakor armor at joints, throats, the gaps between plates that the Velathari had been trained to target since before they could walk. Drakor siege rifles answered, heavy, brutal rounds that shattered wards on impact and kept going, punching through the soldiers behind. The corridor walls cratered, the ceiling buckled, coolant sprayed from ruptured conduits and mixed with blood in 2 colors on the floor. Thorek was at the front, warhammer swinging. He smashed through a ward that a Velathari soldier projected too slowly, the hammer's compressed metal head cracking the crystallized arcana like glass, and the soldier behind the ward took the follow-through across her chest. She flew backward into the formation behind her. Kalindra was at the front of her line. Crystal staff spinning, deflecting siege rifle rounds with wards that formed and dissolved in fractions of a second. She could not match the Drakor in force. She did not try. She fought the way she had fought Calloway, redirecting, angling, using precision where the Drakor used mass. A Drakor soldier lunged at her with a combat blade. Kalindra stepped inside his reach, caught his blade with her staff, and turned his own momentum against him. The blade slid along the staff's crystal length and into the soldier's throat at the gap where his armor met his collar. He dropped. She did not pause. Another soldier came from her right, siege rifle raised. Kalindra projected a ward directly, in front of the barrel, not to block the shot, but to redirect it. The round deflected 90 degrees and punched through the soldier's own thigh plating. He fell. She spun her staff upward, caught a third soldier under the chin with the crystal point, a strike that looked gentle and wasn't. The point pierced the soft tissue behind the jaw and into the brain. He collapsed. Her staff hummed. Violet Velathari blood ran down her wounded arm where the old injury had reopened. She did not feel it. She moved through the battle like water, through rocks, flowing around the force, never meeting it directly, striking at the gaps her enemies left when they committed to attacks that could not reach her. The Velathari were outnumbered 6-1. The numbers should have ended it in minutes. They did not, because 500 Velathari soldiers with crystal staves in a narrow corridor could project overlapping wards that turned the space into a maze of crystallized barriers. The Drakor could not bring their numbers to bear. The corridor was too narrow for more than 8 soldiers abreast. The Velathari wards channeled the Drakor advance into kill zones. For every ward, the Drakor shattered. Another formed behind it. But the wards cost energy. Each projection drained the Velathari soldiers who maintained them. The golden light in their eyes dimmed with each barrier. The crystal staves hummed at lower frequencies. The wards became thinner, more brittle. The Drakor pushed, step by step, body by body, wards cracking, Velathari soldiers falling back. The corridor floor was layered with dead, Drakor and Velathari tangled together in the positions where they had fallen, armor and crystal intertwined. Both forces reached the intelligence core's sealed door at the same time, the Drakor battering through the last Velathari ward line, the Velathari pulling back to the door's threshold, both armies pressing against a bottleneck that could only fit 4 soldiers across. Thorek reached the door. His soldiers blew the locks with breaching charges. The door buckled. Kalindra reached the door from the opposite side of the chamber, a secondary entrance that the Velathari had been moving toward through a parallel corridor. Her soldiers cut through the locking mechanism with a crystal staff. The door opened. Both commanders entered the intelligence core from opposite sides at the same moment. They met in the center of the room, Kalindra with her crystal staff, Thorek with his warhammer, and for a half-second they raised their weapons. Trained reflex. 2 warriors who had just cut through each other's soldiers, meeting in an enclosed space with nothing between them but the expectation of violence. Neither struck. They stood with weapons raised 3 meters apart, looking past each other at what the room contained. The intelligence core was empty. Servers dark, storage crystals removed, consoles wiped. Whatever had been in this room was gone. Cleaned out before either army had reached it, before the first shot was fired, before the breach points opened, before any of them set foot on the vault. Thorek lowered his warhammer first. Kalindra lowered her staff a moment after. "The shapeshifters," Thorek said. "They were always going to run," Kalindra said. "It is what they do." They stood in the empty intelligence core, warlord and attendant, Drakor and Velithari, there, soldiers filling the corridors behind them. And for a moment, the war paused. Not because they chose peace, because the prize they had been fighting over no longer existed. Then Thorok's comm crackled. Krenak's voice. Warlord, the Velithari are engaging our evacuation columns. Corridor 7, casualties mounting. Kalindra's. Comm lit simultaneously. Commander, the Drakar are firing on our extraction teams in the residential district. Ward barriers are failing. They looked at each other. The pause ended. Get your soldiers out of our evacuation routes, Thorok said. Get your soldiers out of our district, Kalindra said. Neither moved. Above them, in the void, the fleets burned. Below them, in the corridors, their soldiers killed each other. And between them, in an empty room where the Thal'Seri's secrets had been two warriors who had once stood in the same chamber inside a living entity measured the distance between where they stood and where the war demanded they go. Kalindra turned and left. What remained of her 500 followed, 363 soldiers walking out of a corridor that had started with F500 an hour earlier, 137 Velithari dead, and behind her, in the corridors, she had cut through to reach this room, 823 Drakor had fallen, 6 for every one of hers. The Velithari had lost a quarter of their force. The Drakar had lost more than a quarter of Thorok's command. Thorok watched them go. Warlord, his second said. Secure the room anyway, Thorok said. The Thal'Seri may have left traces, and get Krenak's evacuation moving. We are done here. In the residential district, the 3,500 Velithari soldiers holding the perimeter had established evacuation corridors to the troop carriers. Velithari families, 20,000 civilians, flowed through crystal-warded passages toward the docking ports. But the Drakor evacuation routes crossed the Velithari perimeter in 3 places, and at each crossing point, the two armies met. The first collision was not in Krenak's sector. It was 2 decks above, where a Drakar battalion. The collision in Krenak's sector came minutes later. His evacuation column rounding a corner met a Velithari formation moving perpendicular. Both stopped. Both assessed. 1,000 Drakar soldiers looking at 400 Velithari soldiers across 20 meters of smoke-filled corridor. We are evacuating civilians, Krenak said. Move aside. We are evacuating civilians, the Velithari. Formation commander said, You move aside. Neither moved. The civilians behind both formations, Drakar families, Velithari families, human refugees who had been following the Drakar, pressed together in the corridors behind their respective armies and waited to see if the war outside had followed them in. It had. A Drakar soldier, not one of Krenak's disciplined troops, a civilian militia F-iter who had picked up a fallen siege rifle, fired at the Velithari formation. The shot hit a ward and dissipated. The Velithari formation commander did not flinch. She raised one hand. 400 crystal staves oriented toward the Drakar column. Hold! Krenak screamed. Hold fire! Hold fire! Too late. The Velithari returned fire. Crystal array bursts, the close quarters variant designed for ship corridors, focused beams that cut through Drakar armor at this range. 3 soldiers went down in the first volley. The Drakar line opened fire. The corridor became a kill zone. Siege rifle blasts and crystal array bursts crossing in a space 12 meters wide. Civilians screaming, the human child that the Drakar soldier had carried now pressed against a wall with her hands over her ears. Krenak threw himself behind a bulkhead. Rounds cracked against the metal beside his head. He keyed his comm to Thorok's frequency. Warlord! The Velithari are inside the vault in force. Approximately 4,000 soldiers. They're cutting. Across our evac routes. We're engaged. Thorok's response was immediate. Casualties? 3 down. Rising. Hold the evacuation. Get the civilians to the pods. If the Velithari block your route, go through them. Through 4,000 Velithari soldiers, Warlord? You have 1,000 Drakar warriors, Krenak. That is more than sufficient. Krenak looked at the corridor. Crystal array fire cutting through the smoke, his soldiers returning fire. Civilians, from 3 species crouched against walls, trapped between 2 armies in a corridor that was never built for war. "Understood, warlord," he said, and charged. Deep in the vault's core, Thoric reached the intelligence vault. The corridors were worse than the market deck. The market had been open, space to move, space to retreat. The corridors were narrow, low-ceilinged for non-Drakor species, forcing Thoric's 8-foot warriors to crouch and hunch as they advanced. The advantage that Drakor size provided in open spaces became a liability in tight passages. They could not swing their weapons fully. They could not form proper lines. They fought hunched, compressed, using short blades and sidearms in spaces designed for beings half their size. The resistance was not organized. It was not military. It was the last spasms of a dying city, pockets of humans in Thal'Seri who had nowhere left to run and chose to fight instead. A human dock worker with a welding torch held a corridor junction for 7 minutes against 4 Drakor soldiers before a shot from behind, fired by another human, trying to clear the corridor for evacuation, hit him in the back. He fell, forward. The Drakar stepped over him. Velethari soldiers moved through the vault's diplomatic section with clinical efficiency. Crystal staves cutting through sealed doors, ward projectors neutralizing security systems, their formations tight and disciplined in corridors that were sized for their frames. They reached the Velethari residential district and began extracting civilians, families, scholars, diplomats, funneling them through secured corridors toward the troop carriers docked at multiple ports. They passed through sections where the fighting had already ended. The aftermath was worse than the fighting itself. Bodies in corridors, blood on walls, 3 colors, layered, mixed. A market stall where someone had made a last stand behind a counter made of alien wood, surrounded by broken merchandise and shell casings, and the quiet that comes after violence has exhausted itself. Thoric reached the vault's command center. The room where Yaveth had sat. Empty screens, dark consoles. The warlord stood in the vault's command center, the room where Yaveth had sat for weeks, monitoring the sector, and looked at empty screens and dark consoles in a city that was dying around him. He looked at the warhammer in his hand. There was nothing here to hit, nothing to fight. The enemy was the situation, and the situation could not be solved with force. The Velethari had withdrawn to the entity's perimeter with 20,000. Evacuees and the cold satisfaction of a species that had achieved every objective. Their citizens were safe. The Drakar fleet was damaged, 2 Ironsides destroyed, a dreadnought crippled, dozens of smaller vessels lost, and the human fleet was too battered to threaten anyone. Sivalith sat in the resonance chamber and felt the aftermath through the veil stream, the pain, the dying, the rage. The silver lines on her skin burned brighter than they had ever burned. She had ordered the attack, not the first shot. That had been a tactical decision made by a scout, commander following sealed orders, but the strategy, the timing, the use of the evacuation as cover for a strike that had crippled the Drakar fleet and repositioned the Velethari as the dominant military force in the sector. Kalindra stood beside her. "The council will approve," she said. The council did approve, Sivalith said. The sealed orders. This was always the contingency. If the ceasefire collapsed, the council wanted us positioned to control the aftermath. And do we control it? Sivalith opened her white eyes. The silver lines pulsed. No. No one controls this. The gate tested us and we failed. Every faction. We were shown a choice and we responded with war. The human fleet had withdrawn to Rally Point Delta with approximately 60% of the human civilians who had been aboard the vault. The others were dead, trapped, or unaccounted for. Vasquez sat in his command chair and stared at a casualty report that grew longer every time his communications officer updated it. The colony transport, 312 dead. The margin of error, crippled. the freeborn haulers that hadn't been fast enough. The civilians in the escape pods who had launched into a crossfire zone, the Marines who had deployed to the docking bays and never came back. Vasquez looked at the casualty report. He looked at the personal log he had written after his vision. The one line about becoming something he could not survive becoming. He understood now what the vision had been showing him, not a choice between two futures. A collapse into a single future, the one where humanity was fractured, leaderless, bleeding, and the only person willing to hold it together was a captain who had just ordered his ship to fire on allies. He closed the casualty report. He opened a fleet-wide channel. This is Captain Vasquez. All human vessels, rally to the Defiance. We are establishing a unified command structure, effective immediately. Any human captain who does not acknowledge this order within the hour will be considered non-cooperative. He paused. I did not ask for this authority. I do not want it. But no one else is stepping forward, and we cannot afford another day without a voice. Vasquez out. 17 ships acknowledged within 30 minutes. 3 did not. It was a start. And in the void, untouched by the war, the entity's crescent pulsed with amber and gold-white light. The entity watched, and it did not understand. It had been grown to seek answers. It had found them. It had shared them. And the factions had responded by tearing each other apart. The gate stood silent. It had nothing left to say. End of episode 9. Thank you for listening.